Have you ever stopped to wonder if the stories told by our ancestors were more than just entertainment? What if the myths of sinking cities, fallen empires, and divine warnings weren't mere fantasies, but hidden prophecies carved into the bedrock of human history? Picture this: the legend of Atlantis, a mighty civilization swallowed by the sea, echoes with an unsettling familiarity. It's a tale that mirrors the collapse of real-world superpowers, from the grandeur of Rome to the twilight of empires we've witnessed in our own time. These stories, passed down through generations, seem to whisper a chilling pattern, one where societies rise to dizzying heights, only to crumble under the weight of their own ambition. And the strangest part, the same themes appear in myths from every corner of the globe, as if ancient cultures were all tuning into the same ominous frequency. From the Epic of Gilgamesh to the Norse sagas of Ragnarok, our ancestors wove tales of creation and destruction, of golden ages and inevitable downfalls. But here's the twist. These myths don't just describe the past, they sometimes feel like they're predicting the future. Think about it. The Mesopotamians wrote of gods punishing humanity with floods, while the Greeks warned of hubris leading to ruin. Fast forward to today, and we see modern nations grappling with environmental crises, political overreach, and the same age-old traps that doomed civilizations centuries ago. It's enough to make you ask, were these myths merely cautionary tales, or did they contain a deeper, almost prophetic understanding of how power corrupts, how empires fracture, and how history repeats itself? That's the mystery we're unraveling in this journey, one that will take us from the dusty tablets of ancient scribes to the geopolitical chessboard of the 21st century. We'll explore how the fall of Atlantis mirrors the decline of modern superpowers, how the cyclical myths of Hindu cosmology align with the rise and fall of economic empires, and why so many cultures insisted on preserving these stories as sacred warnings. By the end, you might just see the headlines of today in a startling new light, as if the past had left us a map, written not in ink but in myth. So let's dive deep, because what we're about to uncover isn't just history, it's a mirror reflecting back at us with unnerving clarity. What if myths weren't just stories, but a kind of ancient code, a survival guide etched into humanity's collective memory? Joseph Campbell famously called this the monomyth, the idea that all cultures share the same core stories because they reflect deep truths about human nature. Take the flood myth, for example. Nearly every ancient civilization from Mesopotamia to the Mayans has some version of a great deluge wiping the slate clean. At first glance, it's easy to dismiss these as simple explanations for natural disasters, but look closer and you'll notice something eerie. These stories aren't just about water. They're about societies growing arrogant, ignoring warnings, and facing catastrophic consequences. Sound familiar? Consider the Tower of Babel, another myth that echoes across cultures. A civilization reaches for the heavens, only to be scattered and humbled by its own ambition. Fast forward to the 20th century, and you'll find the same pattern in the collapse of empires built on unchecked expansion. The British Empire, the Soviet Union both stretched themselves too thin, believing their power was limitless. Just like in the myth, their towers fell. And here's where it gets unsettling. These stories weren't just describing what happened, they were almost scripting it. The same themes of overreach, greed, and divine retribution play out in modern headlines, as if history were following a script written millennia ago. Even more striking are the myths that seem to predict specific modern dilemmas. The Hindu concept of Kali Yuga, an age of moral decline and environmental decay, reads like a checklist of 21st century crises: climate change, political corruption, societal division. The Greeks warned of Nemesis, the goddess who punished those who defied the natural order. Today, we might call that karma, or perhaps the inevitable backlash when corporations pillage the planet or governments ignore their people. The patterns are too precise to ignore. Whether it's the Norse prophecy of Ragnarok or the Aztec legend of the fifth sun, these stories all point to one chilling conclusion: civilizations don't just fade away. They repeat the same mistakes over and over, as if trapped in a loop the ancients saw coming. So were myths' prophecies, maybe not in the crystal ball sense. But they were something just as powerful: a mirror, a way for cultures to pass down hard-won lessons about the traps that await any society drunk on its own power. And if we listen closely, we might just hear the whispers of the past, warning us about the cliff edge we're racing toward today. Long before modern nations grappled with climate change and resource wars, the ancient Akkadians left us a warning etched in clay. Their 4,000-year-old myth of the Curse of Akkad tells of a thriving empire struck down by the gods not through invasion or plague, but through the withering of the land itself. According to the cuneiform tablets, King Naram Sin's people defied divine will by over-harvesting crops, felling sacred cedar forests, and altering rivers until the heavens punished them with scorching winds and barren fields. Archaeologists have since uncovered startling evidence. Sediment layers from that era show a sudden shift to drought conditions, as if nature itself turned against Akkad. Now fast forward to our own era. Venezuela, once South America's wealthiest nation, saw its oil-dependent economy collapse when crude prices plummeted, a modern parallel to Akkad's reliance on finite resources. Or consider the deforestation of the Amazon, where ancient warning signs like soil erosion and biodiversity loss mirror the very conditions that doomed Akkad. Scholars remain divided. Were these myths simply explaining past disasters, or did they encode a timeless truth about civilizations that exploit their environment beyond repair? The eerie precision of the parallels suggests something deeper. When the Akkadian scribes wrote of the great fields yielding no grain, they might as well have been describing 21st century breadbaskets ravaged by climate change. This pattern of ecological hubris echoes in another chilling prophecy, the Norse legend of Fimbulwinter. Their myths foretold 3 years of unending frost preceding Ragnarok, a cataclysm brought on by moral decay. Today, scientists warn of potential nuclear winters or climate tipping points triggered by human actions. Whether through myth or data, the message remains startlingly consistent. Civilizations that ignore the balance of nature invite their own undoing. But resource depletion isn't the only trap foretold in ancient stories. Across the Mediterranean, another myth warned of empires stretched too thin, a cautionary tale we'll see play out with uncanny accuracy in the rise and fall of Rome. The Greeks called it the story of Icarus. The story of Icarus feels almost too familiar, a boy so intoxicated by flight that he ignores his father's warnings, soaring higher until the sun melts his waxen wings. It's a myth we've all heard, but what if it's more than just a fable about disobedience? What if it's a blueprint for the rise and fall of empires? Consider the British Empire at its zenith, stretching so far across the globe that the sun literally never set on its territories. Yet, just like Icarus, that very expansion became its undoing. The cost of maintaining colonies, the resistance from conquered peoples, the sheer strain of governing a quarter of the world, it was all too much. By the mid-20th century, the empire had crumbled under its own weight, its wings clipped by the same ambition that once made it soar. The Soviets followed a similar arc. In their rush to surpass the West, they poured resources into military might and ideological dominance, only to collapse under economic strain and internal dissent. Both empires fell victim to what scholars now call the Icarus paradox, when the very traits that fuel a nation's rise eventually trigger its downfall. And here's the chilling part: the ancients saw this coming. Greek tragedies were obsessed with hubris, that fatal arrogance that invites divine retribution. The message was clear: no matter how high you climb, defiance of natural limits brings ruin. But myths don't just warn of collapse, they also offer clues about resilience. Contrast Icarus with the Norse god Thor, who repeatedly fails yet adapts, learning humility through his mistakes. Or look to the Japanese myth of the phoenix like Ho-Oh, a symbol of rebirth after destruction. These stories suggest that survival isn't about avoiding falls, but about how you rise after them. Modern nations like Germany and Japan, rebuilt from the ashes of war into economic powerhouses, embody this mythic resilience. Their recoveries weren't miracles, they were the result of balance, of tempering ambition with wisdom. So maybe the question isn't whether myths predict the future, but whether we're listening. When legends speak of waxen wings and scorching suns, they're not just spinning tales, they're handing us a mirror, one that reflects the fate of every society that mistakes height for permanence. And if we look closely enough, we might just see our own reflection staring back. The phoenix doesn't just burn, it rises. While so many myths warn of collapse, others whisper a counterpoint, that from ashes rebirth is possible. This idea pulses through cultures worldwide. The Egyptians worshipped the Bennu bird, a fiery heron said to renew itself cyclically. Hindu scriptures describe pralaya not as an end, but as a necessary dissolution before creation begins anew. Even the Bible's flood narrative ends with a rainbow covenant, a promise of renewal. These stories aren't just about destruction. They're about the stubborn resilience of civilizations, the quiet truth that after every dark age comes a renaissance. Take post-war Germany and Japan. Reduced to rubble by the Second World War, both nations staged recoveries so dramatic they became economic legends. Like the phoenix, they rebuilt not by pretending the fire never happened, but by forging new identities from the wreckage. Germany's Wirtschaftswunder, economic miracle, and Japan's meteoric rise as a tech powerhouse didn't happen by accident. They required radical reinvention. Germany reckoning with its past, Japan pivoting from militarism to innovation. Here's where myth and history converge. Renewal isn't passive. The phoenix doesn't simply wake up unscathed, it chooses to rise, but myths also hint at a darker truth. For every phoenix, there's a Carthage, a civilization so thoroughly erased that its rebirth was impossible. The Romans salted its fields, ensuring nothing would grow. Modern parallels exist too. Some nations, like the Soviet Union, fractured beyond repair, their ideologies collapsing under the weight of internal contradictions. This raises a haunting question: is renewal guaranteed? Or is it a fragile opportunity that demands deliberate action? The Aztecs believed the world had been destroyed and remade 4 times, each cycle requiring the gods to sacrifice themselves to begin again. Maybe that's the lesson, that rebirth isn't automatic. It takes work, sacrifice, and sometimes a complete reimagining of what came before, which brings us to the most insidious threat of all: decay from within. Myths are full of it: the Trojan horse, the biblical Sodom, even the Arthurian legend of Camelot crumbling not from invasion, but from betrayal and moral rot. These stories suggest that external enemies might wound a civilization, but the fatal blows often come from within. Consider how Rome's decline wasn't just about barbarian invasions, but about political corruption, economic inequality, and a loss of civic virtue. Sound familiar? Modern superpowers grapple with eerily similar fractures: polarization, institutional distrust, the erosion of shared purpose. So what's the takeaway? Myths don't just predict collapse or promise rebirth, they map the choices that lead to each. The phoenix doesn't rise because it's magical. It rises because it refuses to stay down. And that might be the most urgent warning of all. The Norse didn't just predict the end of the world, they scripted it in chilling detail. Ragnarök, their mythic apocalypse, unfolds not by asteroid or plague, but by the gods themselves turning on each other. Odin devoured by Fenrir, Thor poisoning himself to kill the serpent Jormungandr. Even the divine aren't spared from self-destruction. It's a plotline that feels uncomfortably modern. Replace gods with superpowers, and suddenly Ragnarök reads less like folklore and more like a Cold War playbook. The Cuban Missile Crisis, those 13 days in 1962 when the world teetered on nuclear annihilation, mirrored this exact scenario. Two sides so locked in rivalry they nearly unmade creation itself. But Ragnarök's warning goes deeper than missiles. The myth describes a chain reaction. One betrayal sparks another until the entire system collapses. Sound familiar? Today's geopolitical tensions thrive on escalation loops. Trade wars beget sanctions. Sanctions fuel proxy conflicts. And before long, the machinery of diplomacy grinds to a halt. The ancient Norse called this the fate of the woven, where every thread pulled tightens the noose. Modern strategists call it mutually assured destruction. The names change, but the pattern holds. What makes Ragnarök truly unsettling isn't its violence, it's its inevitability. The Vikings believed their gods knew the ending in advance, yet marched toward it anyway. That same fatalism haunts our era. Climate accords stall while emissions rise. Nuclear arsenals grow despite near-universal consensus on their danger. Like Odin sending his warriors to Valhalla for a battle he knows they'll lose, we stockpile solutions while accelerating toward collapse. The myth suggests a horrifying question. Do civilizations possess a self-destruct mechanism, a coded urge to test their own limits until something breaks? Yet within Ragnarök lies a paradoxical hope. After the fires cool, the myths tell of two survivors, Lif and Lifthrasir, emerging to repopulate the world. It's a reminder that even the worst collapses leave openings for renewal. The doomsday clock may tick closer to midnight, but unlike the Norse gods, we aren't bound by prophecy. Those Cold War near misses didn't trigger annihilation because someone at the last moment chose to step back. That's the loophole the ancients missed. Myths may set the stage, but humans write the ending. This thread of fragmentation runs through other ancient warnings too. The Babylonian Epic of Error shows a civilization crumbling not from invasion, but from internal discord, gods and humans alike consumed by infighting. Today's political polarization, where facts themselves become partisan battlegrounds, mirrors this ancient anxiety. When societies can't agree on reality, they risk becoming their own worst enemies. The Maya saw it coming too. Their prophetic Dresden Codex depicts worlds ending not with a bang, but with a slow unraveling, a trust eroding, institutions hollowing out until the center simply stops holding. Perhaps that's the true power of these stories. They don't just foretell doom, they diagnose it. Like a physician spotting symptoms before the fever spikes, myths lay bare the warning signs, the pride before the fall, the division before the dissolution. The Norse didn't have satellites or summit meetings, but they understood the darkest truth of all. Civilization's greatest threat isn't the monster outside the gates. It's the reflection in the mirror. The Babylonian Marduk prophecy reads like a 2,000-year-old indictment of failed leadership. In this cryptic text, the god Marduk abandons Babylon after its ruler grows so corrupt that even the divine can no longer stomach his reign. The prophecy describes a king drunk on power, raising taxes to crush his people, silencing dissent, and believing himself untouchable. Sound familiar? History's bleakest chapters often begin with this same toxic cocktail: unchecked authority and delusions of infallibility. Look at Nicolae Ceausescu's Romania, where palace halls dripped with gold while citizens froze in breadlines. His cult of personality reached such absurd heights that state media declared his speeches scientific works, until one day the people turned. Like Marduk's abandoned temple, Ceausescu's reign ended with statues toppled and bullet-riddled walls. Ancient myths reserved special contempt for rulers who confused themselves with gods. The Egyptians erased Akhenaten's name from monuments after his radical monotheism backfired. Greek legends made King Midas a cautionary fool, his golden touch twisting blessing into curse. These stories share a spine-chilling consistency. When leaders isolate themselves from reality, their downfall isn't just likely, it's mythically inevitable. Modern autocrats should take note. From Saddam Hussein's vanity palaces to Kim Jong-un's nuclear posturing, the pattern repeats like clockwork. The Marduk text even predicts the method of collapse, not through invasion, but rot from within. The citizens of Babylon will open the gates themselves. It warns just as Ceausescu's own military defected during his final speech. But leadership failures aren't the only danger foretold in these texts. The same clay tablets that condemned bad kings also warned of another existential threat: technological hubris. The Babylonian era epic describes gods unleashing a divine weapon that backfires catastrophically, an eerie parallel to Oppenheimer quoting the Bhagavad Gita after the first atomic test. Today's AI arms race and geoengineering experiments echo this ancient anxiety. When the Sumerians invented the wheel, they also wrote myths about Icarus like inventors plummeting from the sky. Every leap forward came with a story cautioning against overreach. Perhaps that's the real genius of these prophecies. They didn't just predict specific events, they mapped the psychological traps that doom civilizations time and again. A ruler's arrogance, a society's reckless innovation. The moment when progress becomes pride, these are the fault lines. And the myths, they're the seismic sensors, beeping louder with every repeated mistake. Daedalus didn't just build a labyrinth, he created a trap so perfect, even its architect couldn't escape. The myth of the Minotaur's maze isn't just a monster story. It's a chilling metaphor for how humanity's own creations can turn against us. Think about modern financial systems, where derivatives and algorithmic trading tools designed to stabilize markets sometimes spiral into chaos, swallowing fortunes like the Minotaur devouring tributes. Or consider artificial intelligence trained on our own data, yet capable of biases and decisions even its programmers struggle to explain. These aren't just technical glitches, they're echoes of an ancient warning. The more complex the system, the harder it is to control. The Tower of Babel takes this idea further. It's not just a tale of architectural ambition, it's a story about communication breakdown. A united humanity, speaking one language, tries to reach the heavens until their words become garbled and cooperation collapses. Fast forward to today's globalized world, where language barriers and cultural misunderstandings still derail multinational projects, diplomatic talks, even social media algorithms that amplify division instead of connection. The myth suggests a terrifying possibility, that progress without clarity isn't progress at all. Just ask anyone who's passed the fine print of a tech company's terms of service. Sometimes complexity isn't sophistication. It's a smokescreen, but here's where these myths pivot from cautionary to hopeful. Hidden in their warnings is a plea for simplicity. The labyrinth's solution wasn't more walls, it was a single thread, Ariadne's clue, guiding Theseus back to daylight. The Babel survivors didn't rebuild taller towers, they adapted, scattering into smaller, more coherent communities. Modern parallels abound. Open source software thrives on transparency, not secrecy. Grassroots environmental movements succeed where top-heavy policies fail. The lesson, complexity isn't inevitable. Sometimes the smartest systems are the ones designed to be understood and undone by their users. This thread leads us to the most urgent prophecies of all, environmental collapse. The Haudenosaunee myth of the Sky Woman describes a world where every action ripples through the ecosystem, where taking without giving back invites disaster. Polynesian navigators spoke of reading oceans and stars as if nature itself were a language, one we've since forgotten. Today, as microplastics choke marine life and wildfires rewrite coastlines, these stories feel less like folklore and more like last century's ignored memos. The Minotaur's maze wasn't just a prison, it was a closed system with no exits, and if we're not careful, neither is ours, so maybe myths aren't predicting doom. Maybe they're handing us the thread reminding us that every labyrinth has a way out, if only we're brave enough to trace it backward. Deep in Hawaiian forests, whispers tell of the many-hewn tiny, elusive beings who built fish ponds and roads overnight, but vanished if watched. More than just fairy tales, these stories carried a warning: disrespect nature, and the many-hewn would retaliate by dismantling what humans had built. Fishermen who overharvested would find their nets shredded. Farmers who cleared sacred lands awoke to ruin taro fields. This wasn't mere superstition, it was an ancient system of ecological accountability, woven into the fabric of daily life. Fast forward to today, and you'll see the same urgency in the faces of Pacific Islanders protesting rising seas. Their protests a modern echo of the many-hewn's silent rebuke. When native Hawaiians chain themselves to construction equipment to protect Mauna Kea's summit, they're not just activists, they're inheritors of a mythic mandate to defend the balance their ancestors revered. Compare this to the flood myths of Mesopotamia and the Bible, where divine punishment arrives as water, washing away civilizations that grew greedy or corrupt. Parallels to our climate crisis are impossible to ignore. Just as the many-hewn punished imbalance locally, flood myths framed ecological collapse as a global reset, one triggered by humanity's excess. Scientists now warn of blue ocean events, where Arctic ice vanishes entirely, potentially altering weather patterns catastrophically. The ancient Akkadians would have recognized this instantly. Their Curse of Akkad tablet describes God's unleashing wind that scorches the fields after deforestation, a 4,000-year-old climate change report. Yet there's a crucial difference between these myths. Flood stories often depict nature's wrath as inevitable, a force humans can only survive, not prevent. The many-hewn legends, by contrast, suggest something more empowering, that living in harmony isn't just possible, but required. This distinction mirrors today's divide between climate despair and action. When protesters blockade pipelines or replant coral reefs, they're rejecting the notion that collapse is preordained, just as Hawaiians once believed the many-hewn could be appeased through respect and restraint. Economic myths, however, tell a darker tale. The Greek legend of King Midas, who turned his own daughter to gold, encapsulates the peril of valuing wealth over life itself. Modern parallels abound, from corporations prioritizing short-term profits over sustainability to nations exploiting resources until ecosystems collapse. The many-hewn punished greed immediately. Midas' curse unfolded slowly, revealing too late that some costs can't be reversed. perhaps that's the most urgent lesson these myths offer. Time doesn't soften consequences. It only makes them harder to undo. King Midas didn't just turn objects to gold, he turned his own hunger into a prison. The myth cuts deeper than a simple warning against greed. It's a scalpel dissecting the illusion that wealth equals well-being. When everything Midas touched, food, drink, even his daughter, became lifeless metal, the story revealed a terrifying truth. An economy obsessed with accumulation can starve its own people. Fast forward to modern Venezuela, where oil riches once flowed like Midas' golden rivers, yet hyperinflation rendered money literally worthless. Citizens stacked bolivars like kindling, unable to buy bread with piles of cash. Or consider the cryptocurrency crashes that evaporated fortunes overnight, leaving investors holding digital tokens as hollow as Midas' golden statues. These aren't just financial failures, they're mythic patterns playing out in real time. But the myth's brilliance lies in its psychological insight. Midas didn't start as a villain. He was granted a wish, and like many modern economies, he confused growth with prosperity. Gross domestic product, the sacred metric of nations, shares this blind spot. A country can skyrocket in GDP while its citizens drown in debt, its ecosystems collapse, and its social fabric frays. Ancient Greeks called this hubris, the arrogance of mistaking expansion for excellence. The Romans saw it too, when they debased their silver denarius with cheap metals to fund endless wars. They didn't just inflate their currency, they inflated their own demise. Yet myths also offer antidotes. Contrast Midas with the Hindu goddess Lakshmi, who embodies wealth as flowing energy, not hoarded metal. Her iconography shows coins cascading from her hands, symbolizing circulation over accumulation. Or consider the indigenous potlatch ceremonies of the Pacific Northwest, where leaders gained status by giving away resources, not hoarding them. These stories suggest that healthy economies aren't about frozen gold, but about current, about nourishment reaching everyone. The most haunting question Midas leaves us with isn't about money, it's about touch. What does it mean when an economy prioritizes numbers over lived experience? When factory farms produce record profits but toxic food, when gig work boosts employment stats while eroding worker dignity, we're replaying the king's tragedy. His golden touch wasn't just a curse, it was a severing, a loss of the ability to feel the world. Modern materialism risks the same, a society that can quantify everything but savor nothing. This brings us to myths of unity and division, where the stakes shift from gold to belonging. The Cherokee story of the two wolves, one feeding conflict, the other cooperation, mirrors every society's choice between cohesion and collapse. Midas isolated himself with his gold, just as polarized politics fracture communities today. Yet the Hopi prophecy of the Katchinas return speaks of renewal through reconnection, a reminder that economies and ecosystems alike thrive not by accumulation, but by reciprocity. The thread runs through every culture, from Babylon's fallen tower to Scandinavia's fractured gods. The warning is clear: wealth without wisdom is just weight, and no kingdom can fly carrying that much gold. The Tower of Babel wasn't just about language, it was about the moment ambition outpaced understanding. Picture thousands of workers constructing a ziggurat to heaven, each speaking the same words but slowly realizing they no longer meant the same things. Sound familiar? In our digital age, we've built our own towers, social media platforms where algorithms splinter discourse into warring dialects. A vaccine might mean life-saving science to one group and conspiracy to another. Freedom could signify protest to some, recklessness to others. Like the biblical builders, we're left clutching bricks of misinformation, wondering why our collective project keeps crumbling. But myths don't just diagnose fractures, they prescribe cures. King Arthur's Round Table offers a stark contrast to Babel's chaos, where Babel's pride divided, Arthur's humility united. The table's circular shape wasn't just symbolic, it forced knights to listen rather than dominate. Modern experiments echo this ancient wisdom. When Norway's parliament redesigned its chamber in a horseshoe shape to encourage consensus, they unknowingly revived Arthur's template. Even the European Union's hemicycle seating reflects this mythic ideal, a physical rebuttal to the polarization that doomed Babel. The lesson, unity isn't about uniformity. It's about designing systems where every voice adjusts its volume to hear others. Yet myths also warn that unity requires more than furniture. It demands mythic heroes. Not the sword-wielding demigods of Marvel films, but flawed figures who bridge divides. Consider the Navajo changing woman, a deity who absorbed conflict to birth harmony, or the West African trickster Anansi, who used wit to mediate between gods and mortals. These archetypes find modern echoes in figures like South Africa's Nelson Mandela, who transformed prison grudges into reconciliation policies. What makes these heroes mythic isn't their perfection, it's their willingness to stand in the fracture lines. Today's information wars need such translators. Fact-checkers play this role, but so do teachers explaining complex science to skeptical communities, or podcast hosts who interview ideological opposites without caricature. The Norse god Heimdall, guardian of the Bifrost Bridge between worlds, embodies this function not by choosing sides, but by ensuring passage remains open. Our digital Babel desperately needs Heimdalls. The deepest irony, Babel's curse contained its own antidote. When the builders scattered, they didn't just take confusion, they carried seeds of diversity. The Mayans saw this clearly. Their Popol Vuh creation story celebrates how multiple languages arose not as punishment, but as divine artistry. Perhaps that's the final mythic clue. The solution isn't returning to one tongue, but learning to treasure the chorus. After all, ecosystems thrive on variety, not monocrops. The next tower we build might just need many languages, not to divide, but to harmonize. Hercules didn't just complete labors, he redefined what it means to lead through chaos. Each of his 12 trials mirrors a crisis modern governments face. Cleaning the Augean stables echoes rebuilding after economic collapse, slaying the Hydra parallels tackling systemic corruption where solving one problem spawns others. When Franklin Roosevelt launched the New Deal during the Great Depression, he wasn't just passing policies. He was channeling the Hercules archetype. Both faced seemingly impossible tasks. Both transformed brute strength into strategic endurance. Roosevelt's fireside chats, much like Hercules seeking guidance from Athena, showed that true leadership isn't about going it alone. It's about mobilizing collective resilience. Yet myths also warn of leaders who lack this adaptability. Oedipus, for all his intelligence, failed because he couldn't see beyond his own assumptions. Where Hercules consulted others and adapted using the Hydra's venom as a weapon after beheading it, Oedipus doubled down on rigid thinking, mistaking stubbornness for strength. Modern politics brims with Oedipal figures, leaders who dismiss scientific consensus during pandemics or cling to outdated ideologies while societies fracture. The difference between Hercules and Oedipus isn't wisdom, it's humility. One listened to the oracle of Delphi, the other defied it. This raises a provocative question. Why do so few mythic heroes resemble today's politicians? Perhaps because ancient storytellers reserved their highest praise for leaders who served rather than ruled. Consider the Hindu god Rama, exiled to the forest yet still protecting his people, or the Zulu king Shaka, whose military innovations sprang from communal need, not personal glory. These stories suggest that crisis leadership isn't about charisma, it's about labor, Real change, like Hercules' tasks, is messy, iterative, and often thankless. Gender dynamics add another layer. While Hercules embodies masculine endurance, goddesses like Isis and Athena exemplify a different kind of power, one rooted in strategy and restoration. Isis rebuilt Osiris' dismembered body through patience and cunning. Athena gifted Odysseus wisdom when brute force would have doomed him. Modern research supports this mythic intuition. Studies show women leaders often excel in crises, prioritizing collaboration and long-term stability. Jacinda Ardern's pandemic response, blending empathy with decisive action, felt less like Hercules and more like Isis reassembling broken systems piece by piece. The lesson isn't that one archetype triumphs, but that myths offer a full toolkit. Hercules' strength, Athena's wisdom, Isis' persistence, all are needed when foundations shake. The ancients knew what we often forget. Leadership isn't a title. It's a series of labors, each more impossible than the last, undertaken not for glory, but because someone must clear the stables so others can breathe. Cassandra's curse wasn't just foresight, it was the agony of being heard but never believed. The Trojan priestess, gifted with prophecy by Apollo yet condemned to disbelief, stands as one of mythology's most haunting figures. Her warnings about the wooden horse fell on deaf ears, sealing Troy's fate. But this isn't just an ancient tragedy, it's a blueprint for how societies dismiss uncomfortable truths. Climate scientists pleading about rising CO2 levels for decades, only to be mocked or ignored, embody Cassandra's modern counterparts. Whistleblowers like Edward Snowden, revealing surveillance overreach, faced similar disbelief until the evidence became undeniable. The pattern is relentless. Those who sound alarms are often punished twice, first by the crisis they predict, then by the backlash for daring to speak. What makes the Cassandra myth so enduring isn't just its tragedy, but its psychology. Ancient Greeks understood a brutal truth: people reject warnings that disrupt their comfort. The Trojans didn't doubt Cassandra because she lacked proof, they doubted because accepting her truth meant admitting vulnerability. Modern parallels abound. Look at how tobacco companies smeared researchers linking smoking to cancer in the 1950s, or how oil giants funded climate denial despite internal evidence of fossil fuels' dangers. The mechanism is identical: shoot the messenger, then act shocked when the disaster arrives. Even the Hashmi 2 movement echoes this dynamic, women detailing abuse for years, only to be gaslit until collective testimony forced recognition. Yet myths also hint at why this pattern persists. Cassandra's curse came from Apollo, a god representing order and reason. The subtext is chilling. Systemic silencing isn't accidental, it's baked into structures of power. When Icelandic volcanologists warned for years about an overdue eruption, their reports were sidelined until Eyjafjallajökull paralyzed European air travel in 2010. Like Troy's gates swinging open for that fatal horse, systems often welcome their own undoing while shunning those who try to bar the door. But Cassandra's story isn't entirely bleak. Modern media has given silenced voices new megaphones: social scientists documenting inequality, indigenous leaders protesting deforestation, even teenagers like Greta Thunberg sparking global climate strikes. The difference: these Cassandras aren't waiting for kings to listen. They're bypassing gatekeepers entirely, turning prophecies into movements. The myth evolves, no longer cursed to speak unheard, but leveraging connectivity to force reckoning. This thread of displacement and resilience leads us to myths of migration, the ultimate test of a society's willingness to listen. The Aeneid, Virgil's epic of Trojan refugees forging a new home, mirrors today's diaspora stories. Just as Aeneas carried his household gods to Italy, modern migrants bring cultural memory across borders. The lesson hidden in these tales: survival isn't just about foresight, it's about adaptation when warnings go unheeded. Troy burned, but its people's stories didn't end there, and neither perhaps will ours. Aeneas didn't just flee Troy, he carried its soul in his hands. Virgil's epic paints him not as a conqueror, but as a refugee, clutching his aging father and household gods while his city burned behind him. That image, a displaced man bearing the fragments of his culture, could be ripped from today's headlines. Swap the Aegean for the Mediterranean, and Aeneas' boat mirrors those carrying Syrians to Lesbos or Ukrainians across the Vistula. The resonance isn't accidental. Myths like the Aeneid weren't just stories, they were survival manuals, validating the trauma of displacement while whispering a crucial truth: you are still part of something, even when the ground vanishes beneath your feet. Modern refugee narratives echo this mythic template. When Syrian artists in Istanbul recreate Aleppo's lost architecture in miniature, or Ukrainian grandmothers preserve recipes on TikTok as bombs fall, they're doing what Aeneas did, transforming memory into portable heritage. The Yazidis, who carried their oral histories through genocide, share this instinct with the Vietnamese boat people who sewed gold into their clothing, literal and cultural wealth intertwined. These acts aren't just practical, they're mythic. Like Aeneas rescuing the Penates from Troy's ashes, they declare that identity isn't rooted in soil, but in story. But here's where ancient myths challenge modern rhetoric. While politicians frame refugees as burdens or threats, legends like the Aeneid flip the script. Aeneas doesn't arrive in Italy empty-handed. He brings new gods, alliances, and eventually the seeds of Rome itself. The Phoenician princess Dido, herself an exile who built Carthage, underscores this truth: diasporas don't just take, they rebuild. Today's data bears this out. Syrian chefs revitalizing Berlin's food scene, Afghan musicians reshaping European classical traditions. They're not just surviving. Like Aeneas, they're fertilizing new civilizations with transplanted roots. This thread leads to mythic trade networks, the unsung engines of cultural survival. Long before globalization, the Silk Road wasn't just moving silk, it carried Buddhism from India to China, Hellenistic art to Afghanistan, and stories in all directions. The Babylonian Gilgamesh epic surfaced in Hittite and Hurrian versions, proving myths were the original viral content. Modern refugees continue this tradition. WhatsApp groups preserving Ukrainian folk songs, Somali poets reciting in Minneapolis coffee houses. These are today's caravanserais, way stations where stories rest and mutate before journeying onward. The takeaway: myths didn't just predict displacement, they preempted its redemption. When Virgil wrote of Aeneas founding a greater Troy, he wasn't spinning fantasy. He was mapping the alchemy by which broken things become bridges. That's the real prophecy hidden in these tales, not just that people will flee, but that they'll rebuild, and in doing so, reweave the world. Jason's quest for the Golden Fleece wasn't just an adventure, it was a mythic blueprint for globalization. When the Argonauts sailed east to Colchis, they weren't merely chasing treasure, they were threading together distant worlds, much like the Silk Road caravans that would follow centuries later. The fleece itself, shimmering with divine power, symbolizes what every trade route seeks: rare resources that transform societies. Fast forward to today's World Trade Organization disputes over rare earth minerals or semiconductor shortages, and the parallels snap into focus. Just as Jason's voyage sparked conflicts and alliances, modern supply chains weave nations into fraught interdependence, where a single blocked canal in Suez or a factory shut down in Shenzhen can send shockwaves across continents. But the myths reveal something deeper. The Golden Fleece wasn't just taken, It was exchanged through trials and bargains, much like the Silk Road's legendary bazaars where Persian silver traded for Chinese silk. These stories celebrate not just acquisition, but negotiation, the delicate dance of cultural exchange. Consider the Greco-Buddhist art of Gandhara, where Apollo's features merged with Buddha's serenity, or the way Arabian Nights wove Indian, Persian, and Arab tales into a single tapestry. These weren't merely transactions, they were conversations in clay and cloth, proving that the oldest globalization wasn't about domination, but hybridization. Yet myths also warn of globalization's fragility. The collapse of the Bronze Age network, a pre-Silk Road web linking Egypt, Anatolia, and Mesopotamia, mirrors modern supply chain breakdowns. When the Sea Peoples raided or drought struck, this ancient, just-in-time system crumbled, much like pandemic-era port logjams. The Maya faced similar disruptions when their jade trade routes faltered, triggering political collapses. These stories underscore a brutal truth. Interconnectedness breeds vulnerability. The same ships that carried spices and ideas could also carry plague, just as today's digital highways spread both innovation and disinformation. War prophecies lurk in these trade tales too. The Norse myth of Fafnir's gold, a treasure so cursed it turned its keeper into a dragon, parallels how oil wealth fuels modern conflicts. Or consider the Trojan War, sparked not just by Helen's beauty, but by trade rivalries between Mycenaean Greeks and Hittite-aligned Troy. Substitute spices for microchips, and the siege of Troy starts to resemble 21st century tech wars. Even the Aztec prophecy of Quetzalcoatl's return, which Cortés exploited, reveals how trade and conquest intertwine, how the promise of exchange can mask the blade of invasion. Perhaps that's the ultimate lesson hidden in these routes. Globalization isn't new, it's ancient, cyclical, and forever fraught. The Silk Road didn't just move goods, it carried revolutions, plagues, and religions that redrew the world. Today's container ships and data streams are doing the same, proving that the myths were never just about the past. They were roadmaps whispering that every golden fleece comes with dragons, and every connecting thread can become a tripwire. The choice isn't whether to globalize, but how, and the ancients, it seems, left signposts in their stories for exactly this crossroads. The serpent omen in Homer's Iliad strikes like a thunderclap, a blood-red snake coiling around a nest, devouring 8 sparrows before transforming into stone. The seer Calchas deciphers it instantly. Troy will hold for 9 years, then fall. But here's what often gets overlooked. The omen isn't just about Troy's doom. It's about the grinding weight of time, the way war stretches souls thin until even victory tastes like ash. Think of America's 20-year slog in Afghanistan, where initial purpose blurred into mission creep, or the Soviet Union's decade in the same mountains, both superpowers ensnared like Agamemnon's armies. The myth whispers a truth we keep relearning. No war ends where it begins. What makes Homer's omen so chilling is its specificity. 9 years, not a vague someday, but a slow countdown etched into the mythic record. Modern conflicts mirror this eerie precision. The Vietnam War's turning point came almost exactly 9 years after Major U.S. involvement began, with the Tet Offensive shattering public faith. Even the Peloponnesian War, ancient Greece's own quagmire, saw Sparta and Athens locked in attrition for nearly 3 decades, proof that war fatigue isn't a modern invention, but a human constant. The serpent's message, duration is the real enemy, not blades or bullets, but the erosion of will, the moment when soldiers and citizens alike forget why they ever fought. Yet the Iliad's genius lies in how it pairs this omen with another truth. Wars aren't won by stamina alone. For all Troy's 9-year resilience, its downfall comes through Guile, the wooden horse, history's most famous stratagem. This pivot from brute force to deception reveals myth's deeper warning. When conflicts drag on, the rules change. Espionage replaces open battle, shadows trump swords. Consider how Cold War proxy conflicts played out not in grand invasions, but in whispered betrayals and coded broadcasts, or how cyber warfare has rewritten modern combat, where a single hacker can do what armies once could not. The Trojan horse wasn't just a trick, it was the inevitable endpoint of a war gone stale. Myths of subterfuge abound once you start looking. The Norse god Loki, whose silver tongue unravels oaths faster than blades cut flesh. The Hindu Mahabharata, where Krishna's cunning outmaneuvers vast armies. Even the biblical Delilah, who proves that pillow talk can fell giants. These stories share a thread. When strength meets stalemate, intelligence becomes the ultimate weapon. Today's spy satellites and AI-driven surveillance are just high-tech echoes of Odysseus slipping into Troy disguised as a beggar. The faces change, but the game remains. So what's the takeaway? The serpent omen and the horse aren't separate lessons, they're two halves of a single prophecy. Wars may start with declarations, but they end in whispers. And the longer the fight, the quieter the killing becomes. Perhaps that's why these myths endure. They don't just recount the past, they script the future, one weary battle at a time. Loki never just lied, he weaponized truth, twisting it until reality itself unraveled. The Norse trickster god didn't merely spread falsehoods. He crafted stories so plausible they bypassed skepticism, much like today's deepfakes or algorithmically amplified conspiracy theories. When Loki convinced Hother to kill Balder with a mistletoe dart, it wasn't through brute deception. He exploited half-truths and blind spots, preying on trust. Sound familiar? Modern disinformation operates the same way. A manipulated video clip, a quote stripped of context, a statistic skewed just enough to mislead. These are Loki's fingerprints on our digital age, proving that the art of deception hasn't evolved. It's just scaled up, yet myths also offer antidotes. Odin, the All-Father, countered Loki's chaos with relentless curiosity. He sacrificed an eye for wisdom, sought out hidden knowledge, and crucially listened to prophecies even when they unsettled him. This mythic dynamic mirrors today's information wars. Fact-checkers and investigative journalists play Odin's role, trading comfort for truth, while platforms that prioritize engagement over accuracy inadvertently become Loki's playgrounds. The lesson here isn't just about spotting lies, it's about valuing the hard work of verification. Odin didn't gain insight by scrolling headlines. He drank from the well of Mimir, a source demanding sacrifice. In an era of instant gratification, that's a radical notion. Truth might require effort. The Norse didn't stop with Odin. They created entire systems to curb deception. The Thing, their assembly courts, required oaths sworn on sacred rings, not just legal formalities, but rituals invoking divine witnesses. Break your word, and you risked cosmic consequences, not just social backlash. Compare that to today's anonymity online, where trolls face no deeper accountability than a suspended account. Myths suggest a provocative idea. Maybe lies flourish not because we lack tools to detect them, but because we've lost the cultural gravity to discourage them. When the Polynesian trickster Maui tried to deceive the goddess of death, his failure came not from exposure, but from the laughter of bystanders, a communal refusal to take deceit seriously. This thread leads us to infrastructure myths, where deception takes physical form. The labyrinth wasn't just a maze, it was a lie in stone designed to disorient. Modern cities, with their surveillance networks and algorithmic policing, can feel similarly manipulative, steering behavior invisibly. But ancient architects also encoded safeguards. Hindu temple designs, for instance, incorporated truth windows, alignments that revealed the builder's skill or lack thereof when sunlight hit specific points. It's a metaphor worth resurrecting, transparency built into the bones of our systems. Perhaps that's the real gift of these old stories. They don't just warn of tricksters, they map the architectures of trust. From Odin's sacrifices to the Thing's oaths, myths insist that truth isn't passive. It's a structure we must actively maintain, stone by stone, before the next Loki whispers in our ears. Theseus' ship presents a puzzle that's haunted philosophers for millennia. If every plank of a vessel is replaced over time, is it still the same ship? But strip away the abstraction, and you'll find a chilling metaphor for how societies decay, not in dramatic collapses, but through slow, silent erosion. Take Flint, Michigan, where aging pipes leached lead into drinking water while officials insisted the system was fine. Each corroded joint, each delayed repair, was another plank swapped out until the city's infrastructure became something unrecognizable, a ghost of its former self, poisoned by neglect. This isn't just engineering failure, it's mythic pattern-making. The Minoans faced similar decay when their aqueducts clogged with volcanic ash, their brilliance undone by the very systems that once sustained them. Yet myths also offer counterpoints, rituals designed to shock systems back to life. The ancient Athenians reenacted Theseus' voyage annually, symbolically renewing their civic ship by retracing its heroic origins. The Aztecs rebuilt their Great Pyramid over existing layers, not just for stability but as a physical declaration. Renewal requires deliberate action. Modern parallels exist too. Singapore's relentless infrastructure upgrades, replacing sewers before they fail, resurfacing roads on strict cycles, mirror these mythic renewal practices. The difference between Flint and Singapore isn't just resources. It's whether decay is accepted as inevitable or treated as a call to action. But Theseus' ship hides a darker layer. Who decides which planks get replaced? The myth never mentions the sailors who might have cherished the original wood, or the dockworkers paid pennies to make the swaps. Here, class struggle seeps into the parable. The Minotaur's labyrinth wasn't just a monster's den. It was built by enslaved craftsmen under Daedalus' direction. Likewise, Flint's water crisis disproportionately harmed poor, black communities while wealthier suburbs imported bottled alternatives. Myths of decay often mask this truth. Systemic rot isn't random. It flows downhill following the contours of power. The Greeks knew this tension well. Their myth of Hephaestus, the lame god of smiths, reveals the quiet rage of those who maintain systems others take for granted. Cast out of Olympus for being imperfect, he built the gods' palaces and weapons infrastructure crucial to their dominance, yet scorned. Today's maintenance workers, from bridge inspectors to hospital janitors, inherit that paradox, essential yet invisible, praised in crises but ignored in budgets. Perhaps that's the real lesson of Theseus' ship. Renewal isn't just about replacing parts, it's about seeing the whole. When the Japanese practice of kintsugi repairs broken pottery with gold, they honor the breaks as part of the object's history. Modern cities that retrofit historic buildings instead of demolishing them, like Barcelona's superblocks or Detroit's repurposed factories, embody this wisdom. The ship sails on not by pretending it's untouched by time, but by weaving its scars into the voyage. And if we look closely, we might just spot the cracks before they split the hull. The Titanomachy wasn't just a divine family feud, it was the original revolution. A cosmic coup where Zeus and his siblings stormed Olympus to overthrow Cronus and the old order. The parallels to human uprisings are impossible to miss. Cronus, who once deposed his own father Uranus, now faces the same fate, swallowed by the cycle of rebellion he himself began. This isn't just mythology, it's a playbook for every revolution from France's guillotine-strewn streets to Russia's Bolshevik winter. The French revolutionaries didn't just execute Louis XVI, they declared a new calendar, resetting time itself like Zeus dividing the cosmos among his siblings. And just as the Titans were banished to Tartarus, Romanov heirs vanished into Bolshevik cellars. The myth whispers an uncomfortable truth: no ruler is eternal, and every revolution carries the seeds of its own eventual overthrow. What makes the Titanomachy especially revealing is how it legitimizes revolt while warning of its costs. Zeus doesn't win through pure strength. He needs the Cyclops' thunderbolts and the hundred-handers' numbers, just as revolutions rely on alliances between intellectuals and the masses. Yet Hesiod's version lingers on the aftermath. The earth scorched, the heavens trembling, the furies born from spilled divine blood. The Russian Revolution promised utopia but birthed the Gulag. France's liberté devoured its children in the terror. These aren't just historical footnotes, they're echoes of the myth's central tension. Creation requires destruction, but destruction doesn't guarantee creation. The Greeks understood this duality intimately. Their Titanomachy wasn't celebrated outright, it was ritualized in festivals like the Chronia, where masters served slaves for a day, simultaneously commemorating the overthrow of hierarchy while containing its disruptive potential. Compare this to how modern states handle revolutionary anniversaries, China's careful management of Tiananmen memory, or America's 4th of July fireworks masking the Continental Army's near starvation at Valley Forge. Myths and nations alike sanitize upheaval once the dust settles, turning chaos into ceremony. Nowhere is this clearer than in how revolutions adopt mythic imagery. The Bolsheviks didn't just quote Marx, they painted Lenin as a Prometheus bringing the fire of communism. French revolutionaries staged festivals of reason in Notre Dame, replacing saints with liberty goddesses straight from Hesiod's pantheon. Even the American Revolution minted coins with pyramid-eyed providence, blending Egyptian motifs with Enlightenment ideals. These weren't mere propaganda tricks. They were attempts to root radical change in ancient patterns, assuring people that even the most earth-shaking revolts fit a cosmic script. But the Titanomachy's most sobering lesson emerges in its aftermath. Zeus doesn't rule unopposed, he faces challenges from giants, Typhus, even the threat of his own eventual overthrow by a prophesied son. Revolutions too carry this recursive danger. The Jacobins birthed the Directory which birthed Napoleon's empire. Iran's Islamic Revolution traded a Shah for Ayatollahs. Like Cronus swallowing his children, systems often reproduce the very oppression they vowed to destroy. This thread of cyclical violence leads us to mythic plagues, nature's own revolutions. When Apollo rains arrows of pestilence on the Greeks in the Iliad, it's not just divine wrath, it's the great leveler striking down kings and foot soldiers alike. The parallels to our own pandemic era are unsettling. Masks in Florence's plague processions resembling PPE, or the way COVID exposed societal fractures like Apollo exposing Agamemnon's arrogance. Both myths and microbes remind us that when hierarchies crack, neither throne nor wealth guarantees survival. Perhaps that's the Titanomachy's ultimate warning. Revolutions aren't singular events, they're processes, cascades where each upheaval alters the terrain for the next. The Titans' fall made room for Olympians, whose reign still trembled at prophecies of decline. Modern revolutions, for all their manifestos, rarely escape this spiral. The challenge isn't just to overthrow, but to build something that doesn't demand perpetual overthrow, a puzzle the ancients etched in starlight and blood. Apollo's plague arrows in the Iliad didn't just kill, they exposed. When the god's wrath struck the Greek camp, sickness became a spotlight, revealing Agamemnon's greed and the fragility of power. Fast forward 3,000 years and COVID-19 did the same. Leaders who dismissed early warnings, hospitals overwhelmed by preventable surges, the stark divide between those who could work from home and those who couldn't. The pandemic, like Apollo's arrows, didn't create these fractures. It illuminated them. The parallels run deeper than suffering. Just as the Greeks interpreted their plague as divine punishment, modern conspiracies framed the virus as moral reckoning, from religious extremists calling it God's judgment to politicians blaming foreign bat-eaters. The Mythic template holds disease never just spreads, it narrates. But ancient societies didn't just interpret plagues, they ritualized them. The Greek pharmakos ritual, where a community expelled a scapegoat to purify itself, sounds barbaric until you recognize its modern mutations. During the Black Death, Jews were burned as well poisoners. In 19th century New York, Irish immigrants were blamed for cholera. Even in 2020, Asian communities faced violence as COVID, original sinners. The scapegoat mechanism hasn't vanished, it's digitized with hashtags replacing tortures. Yet myths also encoded smarter responses. The Bible's Leviticus prescribed isolation for the sick, history's first quarantine protocol, while Ayurvedic texts outlined contagion theory centuries before germ theory. These weren't just rules, they were cultural memory, hard-won lessons fossilized into story. The irony, those same stories warned against the very resource hoarding that plagues exacerbate. When Apollo's arrows flew, the Greeks didn't just lose men, they ran out of clean water, their supply lines snapping under strain. Sound familiar? The toilet paper shortages of 2020, the oxygen tank black markets in Delhi, the vaccine nationalism that left poorer nations unprotected all replay the Iliad scarcity playbook. Even antibiotic resistance fits the pattern. Like Agamemnon hoarding Briseis, industrial farming overused antibiotics for profit, breeding superbugs that now threaten modern medicine. The mythic warning was clear: crises don't just test health systems, they test priorities, which brings us to the wars sparked by such shortages. The Trojan War itself began partly over resources, the fertile plains of the Dardanelles, a strategic trade chokehold. When Apollo's plague weakened the Greeks, it wasn't just lives they lost, it was leverage. Today's climate crises follow the same script. Syria's drought helped fuel its civil war. Lake Chad's disappearance armed Boko Haram, even the U.S. Pentagon classifies climate change as a threat multiplier. The ancients personified these tensions as gods. We graph them as data, but the equation remains unchanged. Subtract water, add conflict. Perhaps that's the real function of plague myths. They're not just about suffering, they're about systems. Apollo's arrows targeted more than bodies. They hit supply chains, social contracts, the lies leaders tell themselves. And if we're listening, they still do. Fafnir wasn't just a dragon, he was a cautionary tale written in scales and fire. The Norse legend tells of a dwarf so consumed by greed that he transformed into a monster, guarding his stolen gold in an underground lair. But this isn't just fantasy. Look at the Democratic Republic of Congo, where coltan, the black gold powering smartphones, fuels armed conflicts that have claimed millions of lives. Like Fafnir's treasure, these minerals glitter with promise, yet their extraction leaves scars deeper than any dragon's claws. The myth's genius lies in its psychological insight. Greed doesn't just corrupt. It dehumanizes, twisting guardians into hoarders and nations into battlegrounds. The parallels between Fafnir's curse and modern resource curses are unnervingly precise. Venezuela's oil wealth turned from boom to bust as quickly as Fafnir's gold brought death to his family. Sierra Leone's diamond fields, once symbols of prosperity, became killing fields during civil wars. Even the ancient Greeks warned of this trap. King Midas learned the hard way that golden touch can mean starvation. These stories share a DNA strand. Resources aren't the problem. It's the obsession, the delusion that wealth equals immunity. Fafnir didn't just guard gold. He believed it made him invincible until Sigurd's sword proved otherwise. Yet myths also encode escape routes. The Volsunga saga shows Sigurd defeating Fafnir not through brute force, but by digging a pit and striking upward, a metaphor for systemic solutions targeting root causes. Modern equivalents exist, but Swana avoided the diamond curse by channeling revenues into education and infrastructure. Norway's sovereign wealth fund transformed oil profits into renewable energy investments. These aren't just policy successes, they're mythic wisdom in action, recognizing that treasure, untethered from purpose, becomes poison. This thread of transformation leads us to mythic warnings about artificial intelligence. Like Fafnir's gold, AI holds dazzling potential and peril. The golem of Jewish folklore, a clay servant turned uncontrollable, mirrors anxieties about algorithms exceeding human intent. The Greek Pandora, whose box unleashed unintended consequences, feels eerily prophetic in an era of deepfakes and biased datasets. Even Fafnir's brother Regin, who forged Sigurd's sword but later betrayed him, embodies the creator-creation tension simmering in Silicon Valley today. The lesson isn't that technology is inherently dangerous, it's that power without wisdom breeds monsters. Fafnir didn't start as a dragon, he became one through unchecked desire. Our modern gold, whether oil, data, or AI, demands the same vigilance because the oldest myths remind us the real treasure was never the hoard, it's the wisdom to use it well. Talos the bronze giant wasn't just a marvel of ancient engineering, he was a warning etched in bronze. This mythic automaton, forged by Hephaestus to patrol Crete's shores, could hurl boulders at invaders and glow red-hot with divine fire. But his programming had a fatal flaw, a single vulnerable vein in his ankle. When the Argonauts tricked Medea into exploiting this weakness, Talos bled out his life force, Nika, the god's golden blood. The story reads like a 2,000-year-old algorithm audit, exposing the dangers of systems too powerful to question yet fragile in unexpected ways. Today's debates over artificial intelligence mirror this tension. When facial recognition software misidentifies people of color or chatbots parrot harmful biases, it's Talos' vein all over again, flaws baked into the design, waiting to be exploited. What makes Talos especially prophetic is how he embodies the boundary between human and machine. The Greeks called his lifeblood Icar, the same fluid that flowed through Olympian veins, blurring the line between divine creation and living being. Modern AI developers grapple with this same ambiguity. When a language model generates poetry or a robot mimics empathy, we're forced to ask, at what point does simulation become something more? The Japanese concept of Tsukumagami objects gaining souls after 100 years suggests even ancients feared the moment tools might wake up. But Talos' downfall hints at a darker truth. The real danger isn't machines becoming human. It's humans outsourcing morality to machines, like King Minos relying on his bronze enforcer to make ethical judgments about who lived or died. Shift the lens to today's killer robot debates, and the parallels grow eerie. The United Nations stalled talks on autonomous weapons systems replay Talos' myth with terrifying precision. A machine programmed to identify and eliminate threats sounds efficient, until you remember Talos mistook the Argonauts for invaders. Ancient Cretans might have called this divine will. We call it algorithmic error. Both mask the same reality, absolving humans of accountability. The Mahabharata's tales of celestial weapons that could think for themselves, only to spiral out of control, underscore how old this anxiety truly is. Yet myths also offer utopian counterpoints. Hephaestus' golden maidens, benevolent automatons who assisted the gods, represent AI's brighter potential tools that lift rather than dominate. The Chinese legend of Kuafu, who transformed his corpse into a peach forest to nourish future generations, mirrors modern hopes for AI solving climate crises or curing diseases. Even Talos himself wasn't inherently evil. He was a protector turned hazard by poor oversight. The difference between dystopia and utopia, these stories suggest, isn't the technology. It's the hands and values that guide it. Perhaps that's the ultimate lesson coiled inside Talos' bronze shell. Every transformative tool, from fire to neural networks, carries twin potentials: to guard or destroy, to enlighten or deceive. The myths don't just warn us about machines, they warn us about ourselves, our tendency to build faster than we think, to automate ethics rather than embody them. Talos didn't fail because he was artificial. He failed because his creators forgot that even giants need guardrails. Shangri-La wasn't just a hidden paradise. It was a mirror held up to humanity's obsession with perfection. James Hilton's mythical Himalayan kingdom, where time stood still and suffering vanished, taps into the same longing that fueled real-world utopian experiments. The Soviet Union promised a workers' paradise, yet its 5-year plans birthed bread lines instead of abundance. Silicon Valley's techno-utopians pledged digital egalitarianism, only to deliver algorithmic inequality. These failures aren't coincidental, they're mythic patterns playing out in real time. The legend of El Dorado, the golden city that lured conquistadors to their doom, shares the same DNA, a glittering ideal that crumbles upon contact with human nature. What makes these myths so enduring isn't their fantasy of flawlessness, but their quiet critique of it. Shangri-La's monks might have achieved immortality, but at what cost? Their isolation echoes the dystopian undercurrent of every perfect society: the suppression of dissent, the erasure of individuality. The Soviet collectives that banned private property, and the tech campuses preaching disruption while enforcing conformity, both learned this the hard way. Utopias demand too much not of effort, but of humanity itself. Even Plato's Republic, the granddaddy of political idealism, relied on philosopher kings and noble lies, exposing the uncomfortable truth: perfection requires deception. Yet myths don't just condemn utopias, they offer alternatives. Contrast Shangri-La with the Norse concept of Midgard, a middle realm that's neither heaven nor hell but home. It's flawed, besieged by chaos, yet worth defending. This mythic realism resonates in societies that embrace incremental progress over radical purity. Post-war Scandinavia's welfare states didn't promise paradise, just decent healthcare and education. Bhutan measures gross national happiness alongside GDP. These aren't utopias, they're works in progress, acknowledging that human thriving happens in the messy middle, not at some unreachable peak. The Aztecs understood this balance deeply. Their myth of the fifth sun declared the current era destined to end in earthquakes, not as punishment, but as natural cycle. Unlike Shangri-La's frozen perfection, their cosmology embraced impermanence. Modern sustainability movements echo this wisdom, recognizing that resilience matters more than stasis. Dutch engineers designing floating cities for rising seas, or Japanese disaster parks teaching earthquake readiness, aren't chasing utopia. They're practicing mythic realism, preparing for breakdowns while building anyway. This cyclical view of time, central to Hindu yugas, Mayan calendars, and Norse Ragnarök, holds the key. Utopias assume linear progress, but myths whisper that history spirals. The Great Depression's collapse and rebirth as the New Deal, the Industrial Revolution's pollution birthing environmentalism, each decline carries seeds of renewal. The Chinese legend of the phoenix like Feng Huang rising from ashes with newfound brilliance captures this paradox. Collapse isn't the end, it's the price of transformation. So perhaps the real wisdom of Shangri-La lies not in its impossible serenity, but in its location perpetually just beyond reach. Like a desert mirage, it reminds us that the pursuit of perfection often obscures the beauty of the imperfect now. And that's where mythic time cycles offer their greatest gift, not a guarantee of eternity, but permission to begin again. The Mayan calendar didn't just track time, it predicted its collapse. Unlike modern calendars counting forward endlessly, the Mayan long count operated in grand cycles called world ages, each ending in dramatic transformation. The fifth and current age, they believed, would culminate in December 2012, a date that sparked global panic despite scholars clarifying it marked renewal, not apocalypse. This cyclical vision mirrors economist Nikolai Kondratyev's waves of technological boom and bust, or Strauss and Howe's theory of generational crises repeating every 80 years. The common thread: history doesn't march forward, it spirals, with each turn echoing the last. Consider the Mayan concept of Kayatun, a 20-year period where societal patterns replay. The 1920s roaring excess and stock crash found its rhyme in the 2000s housing bubble. The 1960s cultural upheaval resurfaced in 2020's protests and reevaluation of norms. These aren't coincidences, they're fractal repetitions, the kind the Maya encoded in their calendars' nested cycles. Modern economists chart Kondratyev waves spanning 50 to 60 years, from steam engines to microchips, each wave cresting in innovation before crashing into recession. The Mayas might have called these smaller Kayatuns within their grander epochs, yet the Maya weren't alone in rejecting linear progress. Hindu cosmology's yugas describe golden and iron ages cycling endlessly, while Norse Ragnarok promises destruction and rebirth. Even the Greek myth of the ages of man, gold, silver, bronze, and iron frames decline as inevitable but temporary. These narratives share a radical idea: progress isn't cumulative. Societies don't just ascend, they rise, stagnate, and reset. Modern thinkers from Oswald Spengler to Yuval Noah Harari flirt with this notion, suggesting civilizations have life cycles like organisms. The Maya simply gave it math, their calendar acting as a celestial clockwork counting down to renewal. This challenges the Enlightenment's linear optimism, the belief that each generation improves upon the last. Silicon Valley's move fast and break things mentality assumes perpetual upward trajectories. Yet ancient myths warn otherwise. The Aztec fifth sun, destined to end in earthquakes, or the Hopi prophecy of civilizations purged by fire, these aren't doomsday fantasies. They're acknowledgments that systems fatigue, that every golden age carries the seeds of its own unraveling. Modern progress often masks this truth. The Roman Empire didn't fall in a day. It eroded through inflation, brittle supply chains, and elite overproduction ailments haunting superpowers today. The most provocative twist: modernity has its own mythmakers. Climate change models project feedback loops straight out of Mayan cosmology. Ice melt reducing reflectivity, causing more warming, a self-reinforcing cycle. Bitcoin's halving events, programmed every 4 years to induce scarcity, mirror the Kayatun's rhythmic contractions. Even pop culture feeds the cycle. Franchises like Mad Max and The Hunger Games depict civilizations rebuilding atop ruins, a secular Ragnarok. The difference is packaging. Where ancients spoke in gods and epochs, we code algorithms and scenarios. perhaps the Mayas' greatest insight was temporal humility. Their calendar didn't just measure days, it framed time as a wheel, not an arrow. In an era obsessed with infinite growth, that's the myth we most need to hear. The Death Star isn't just a weapon, it's the latest incarnation of an ancient nightmare. When George Lucas sketched that moon-sized battle station, he wasn't inventing, he was channeling. The same dread that filled Babylonians reading about Marduk's war against Tiamat, or Greeks shuddering at Typhon's fire-breathing rampage, now grips audiences watching star-killer base annihilate planets. Star Wars didn't create mythic archetypes, it plugged into them like a lightsaber into a kyber crystal. Dune's Harkonnens, with their grotesque cruelty and spice monopolies, mirror the Assyrian kings who hoarded cedar and lapis lazuli while flaying rebels alive. These franchises thrive because they're not just stories, they're modern-day clay tablets, etching old warnings in digital ink. Look closer at the patterns. The galactic empire's rise, cloaked in senatorial procedure before revealing its iron fist, mirrors Augustus dissolving Rome's republic while preserving its titles. Paul Atreides' Messiah complex in Dune parallels the Zoroastrian Saoshyant prophecy, where a chosen one purges the world's corruption. Even the Jedi Code, with its emphasis on balance over attachment, echoes Buddhist sutras warning that desire breeds suffering. The genius of these sagas lies in their remixing, not inventing. When Palpatine declares, "I am the Senate," he's Zeus swallowing the metis of democracy whole. When the Bene Gesserit manipulate bloodlines, they're the Norse Norns weaving fate, but with genetics instead of thread. Hollywood's real innovation wasn't special effects, it was realizing that mythic resonance could be industrialized. Marvel's Thanos snapping half the universe away, that's Shiva's cosmic dance updated for the algorithm age. The Matrix's red pill/blue pill choice, a Silicon Valley spin on Persephone's pomegranate seeds. These narratives stick because they're not just selling escapism, they're fulfilling humanity's oldest job, making sense of chaos through story. The hero's journey that Joseph Campbell traced across cultures now unfolds in multiplexes, with lightsaber duels replacing sword in the stone moments. Yet some critics dismiss this as derivative endless reboots masking creative bankruptcy. They miss the point. Myths were never meant to be original, they were meant to be retold. The Epic of Gilgamesh exists in multiple versions across millennia, each adapting to its era's needs. Star Wars sequels and spin-offs operate the same way, refracting timeless conflicts through contemporary lenses. Rey's scavenger roots speak to economic anxiety. Kylo Ren's radicalization mirrors online extremism. Like Babylonian scribes updating flood myths for new audiences, Disney's writers recalibrate the Force's balance for the TikTok generation. The most compelling evidence lies in fan reactions. When audiences debate Grey Jedi morality or past Dune's prescient visions, they're not just consuming content, they're participating in myth-making. Ancient Greeks didn't just listen to Homer, they argued over Odysseus' choices in symposiums. Modern forums continue this tradition, dissecting whether Luke's exile was wisdom or cowardice with the same intensity theologians once debated Abraham's sacrifice. This communal storytelling, fan theories as oral tradition, cosplay as ritual reenactment proves these franchises have transcended entertainment. They've become what the Bhagavad Gita was to warriors or the Popol Vuh to the Maya, guides for navigating existence's storms. So next time someone scoffs that Star Wars is just space wizards for kids, remind them, the original wizards Merlin, Odin, Laozi were also dismissed as fantasy until history proved them prophets. The Galactic Empire's tyranny, the Spice Melange's addictive grip, the rebellion's flickering hope, they're not fiction. They're tomorrow's headlines whispered in the language of yesterday's campfires. Stephen Jay Gould famously dismissed myths as just so stories, colorful fictions we invent after the fact to explain patterns that may not exist. Like seeing faces in clouds, he argued, humans project meaning onto random events, dressing up coincidence as prophecy. At first glance, the data seems to support him. Of course, ancient flood myths proliferated, coastal civilizations all experienced tsunamis. Naturally, war gods resemble each other. Human conflict follows predictable scripts. But this reductionist view misses the forest for the trees. It's like analyzing a symphony by dissecting individual notes while remaining deaf to the harmony. Carl Jung offered a compelling counterpoint with his concept of synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that defy causal explanation but resonate with deep truth. The Chinese called this the Tao, the invisible thread connecting seemingly unrelated events. When multiple cultures independently describe a global deluge or a dying andrizing god, it's not because they copied each other. It's because they were tuning into the same archetypal frequencies, the fundamental patterns of human experience. Modern complexity science lends unexpected support here. Fractal geometry shows how simple rules generate infinite self-similar patterns from river networks to galaxies. Could myths be humanity's fractal maps, encoding societal rise and fall into memorable narratives? The real test lies in utility, not literalism. No serious scholar claims the Minotaur literally lurked in Crete's basement, but as a metaphor for civilization's dark underbelly, the sacrificed youths, the maze of bureaucracy, it becomes chillingly prescient. Take the 2008 financial crisis, the labyrinthine derivatives market, the bull-headed recklessness of traders, the eventual sacrifice of public bailouts. It's all there in the myth, wrapped in symbolic language. This isn't confirmation bias, it's pattern recognition honed over millennia. Indigenous Australians didn't need satellites to create songlines, oral maps so accurate they guided travelers across thousands of miles. Their myths worked regardless of how they explained geography. Actionable insights emerge when we stop asking, "Did this happen?" and start asking, "Why does this keep happening?" The Icarus myth isn't a flight manual, it's a warning about technological hubris that applies equally to Titanic's unsinkable claims and Chernobyl's safety protocols. Norse Ragnarok isn't a weather report. It's a playbook for navigating societal collapse, complete with survival strategies Lif and Lifthrasir hiding in the world tree's roots. When Silicon Valley billionaires build doomsday bunkers while ignoring climate change, they're replaying the Norse gods' fatalism and missing the myth's real lesson. Renewal requires adaptation, not isolation. The skeptic's mistake is assuming myths must be either fact or fiction, when their power lies in transcending that binary. They're the original algorithms, compressed wisdom distilled into narrative code. Aesop didn't care if foxes actually talked. He cared that generations remembered not to drop their cheese for flattery. That's the alchemy we've forgotten. Truth doesn't need to be factual to be true. Imagine if every government budget included a myth audit, a checklist not of dollars but of archetypes. Would this infrastructure project turn us into King Midas, gilding short-term gains while starving future generations? Does that foreign policy risk replaying Ragnarok's escalation loops? The ancients left us more than stories. They encoded ethical stress tests in narrative form, and we're only now realizing how desperately we need them. Take sustainable economics. The Midas myth doesn't just warn against greed. It reveals how single-minded pursuit of one metric like GDP can paralyze an entire system. Iceland's response to the 2008 financial crisis, jailing bankers and rewriting constitutions, echoed the myth's lesson. Wealth that can't nourish is just weight. Now apply this lens to modern diplomacy. The Norse envisioned Ragnarok as a cascade of betrayals, each side locking into retaliation until the world burned. Cold War mutually assured destruction followed this script exactly, as do today's trade wars where tariffs beget tariffs, but myths also offer exits. The Aztec god Quetzalcoatl refused human sacrifice, insisting on flower offerings instead. Translated to policy, this could mean replacing punitive sanctions with cultural exchange programs, turning conflict spirals into virtuous cycles. Individuals can play this game too. Spotting mythic cycles in daily life becomes a revelatory exercise. That startup scaling too fast, a potential Icarus. The influencer trading privacy for fame, a digital narcissus. These aren't just metaphors, they're diagnostic tools. When Silicon Valleys move fast and break things, mantra led to social media's unraveling. It wasn't just bad business, it was Phaethon ignoring Apollo's warnings and scorching the earth with his father's sun chariot. The real power of mythic thinking lies in its preventative medicine. Before the 2008 crash, had anyone asked, "Are we building a Trojan horse?" Noting how complex financial instruments hid systemic risk, the crisis might have been averted. Climate negotiations today could benefit from Poseidon's lesson. The sea god wasn't appeased by apologies after the fact, only by changed behavior. What's striking is how these stories bypass partisan divides. Conservatives and progressives might spar over carbon taxes, but both can agree that squandering resources like the prodigal son leads to ruin. The Hindu concept of dharma, balancing individual and collective good, could reframe debates from healthcare to AI ethics, offering a third way beyond libertarian and authoritarian extremes. This isn't about replacing data with folklore. It's about augmenting spreadsheets with narratives that resonate across millennia. When the Cherokee tell of two wolves battling within us, one fearful, one generous, they're not describing literal animals, but a neural framework for decision-making. Modern psychology confirms it. We're wired for story, not statistics. Policies framed as rewriting the hero's journey, like Germany's energy transition, inspire more than technocratic mandates. So here's the challenge. Next time you face a dilemma, personal or political, ask which myth you're living. Are you Theseus forgetting to change your ship's sails, perpetuating outdated methods? Or perhaps Sisyphus mistaking busyness for progress? The answers won't be in the stars, but in stories older than nations themselves. And if we listen closely, they just might help us break cycles that our spreadsheets alone can't solve.